Thank you very much, Alexandre. I hadn't realised I was going to be up quite so quickly, but hello everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. And it's a special pleasure to present to you in 10 minutes flat what we've been doing for a few months now, the three of us. So Miriam Beuten, who's there, Christophe Burch and myself, on the protection of minors. So it's a really topical question, of course, because of the widespread attention on the protection of minors, but also because it's an implementation priority of the European Commission in relation to the DSA and the very large online platforms and search engines that it regulates. It's also particularly timely because the European Commission is about to launch a consultation on its upcoming guidelines. And so those are the reasons why we thought we would tackle this question. So we've thought about two issues, basically, and that's age assurance and appropriate design. And so what I'll do first is to present the paper that I authored, but bearing in mind that, of course, one of the biggest difficulties in all of this area is striking the right balance between, on the one hand, the need to protect children online, but also making sure that they can take all the benefits of being online in terms of education, entertainment, and social interaction. So the balance is already there when you're talking about minors and child protection. The second difficulty, I think, is the fact that we also need to think about the need to protect all of us as citizens as well, and not to, lock the internet in protecting minors. The third issue, of course, is the platforms, making sure that we devise a framework that works for them and where they can provide their services cross-border. So there's a big balancing exercise to be achieved. So in the first paper on age assurance, what I sought to do was to do a comparative analysis of what we see at the national level. And I looked at France, Germany, Ireland, Italy, and the UK, and also Australia. And I've sought to analyse as well the ecosystems of rules at the EU level, not only what we have in the DSA, and make sure as well not to take any political position, because that's not my role, and it's not our role as academics particularly. So, and basically to shed lights on what action could be taken at the EU level to basically protect minors in relation to age assurance. So the big issue that I highlight in the report is that there is a tension between, on the one hand, the rules of the DSA, which are full harmonisation rules, and which basically don't define what is harmful for minors, and the EU legislation as well does not impose age assurance technology. It mentions it as a possibility, but it certainly doesn't impose it. At the same time, we have the Audiovisual Media Services Directive that actually allows the member states to adopt more far-reaching rules on the protection of minors, including on age assurance. And so all this leaves us with the situation that a lot of member states are legislating in the area and have adopted or are adopting as we speak legislation on age assurance. And so that, of course, creates an enormous tension in the internal market. So to turn just quickly to the recommendations, because I've only got 10 minutes, I'm just going to give you a very top-level overview of what we suggest in this paper, or what I suggest, to put an end to the internal market fragmentation, that's for sure. Now, how can we do that? Possibly by examining the need to mandate, and I know it's a nasty word, age verification in relation to preventing minors from accessing particularly harmful content. And I'm talking here about pornography, online pornography services in particular, but also possibly other types of very harmful content. So possibly look at that option. Certainly probably settle the overlap between the AVMSD and the DSA, because that is creating tension, because the objective is really to put an end to the national level initiatives that are arising, and I can talk about them more later on. In any case, there's also something to be done in relation to well, there's a question of, will the guidance be sufficient? And I mean, I hope it will be, but it's possible that it won't be sufficient, in which case targeted legislation, and I know you don't like, some of you don't like that word, but maybe we will need a bit of targeted legislation. And in any event, decide about age assurance technology. Who should be setting the norms? What should be the role of regulators in that respect, and of the European Commission in particular? And then address the level of oversight of that technology. So those are the big recommendations that I make in that paper. Turning now to the paper that Miriam wrote on age-appropriate design. Basically, what she does is she sets out some principles and a framework to make sure that the DSA's rules are implemented in an actionable manner, in a very concrete actionable manner. And appropriate design here means all the ways by which platforms can design, govern and manage their services in the best interest of children. And she puts forward the fact that there are two basic levels. There's one, the technical level, and then there's the governance level, which is about making sure that the platforms have systems and governance processes to regulate, if you want, the conduct and the content on the platform. And there's always the guiding principle that the best interests of the child should be taken into consideration, of course. And that's not an easy thing because it's context sensitive, and children are not all equal and have different needs depending on their age groups, etc. The DSA's rules, I'm not going to go through them, of course, because I don't have time and you probably all know them. But basically, the question is, what is a reasonable expectation for the platforms in relation to the implementation of the rules of the DSA? And that's where, of course, the Commission's guidelines will be extremely important. So in terms of what she comes up with is a framework for age-appropriate design that could guide the implementation of the DSA, and she puts forward a number of principles that should be followed by perhaps the Commission in its guidelines, but also by platforms. And I'm not going to highlight all of them. There are 8 of them there on the slide. Maybe one of them is proactive strategies, basically making sure that on the platform, there's always the idea that the platform should anticipate the risks and not actually wait for them to happen before there is anyway. So there's lots of different principles there. And then what she also does is to put forward a very concrete and flexible guidance through a number of best practices, grey practices and black practices. And the best practices are those that are accepted by industry and that take into consideration the rights of the child to the utmost manner. And then the grey practices are the ones that could be problematic but could be accepted but should be subject to strict oversight. And then the bad practices are the ones that should be completely outlawed. And so that's Miriam's recommendations, and there's lots of practical examples there that you can find in her report. We also did a third issue paper, which basically bridges the two topics together because there's linkages between age-appropriate design and age assurance, of course, because how can you design your platform if you don't know how old the minors are? And there are linkages between the two in the sense that if you put age verification before a child arrives on the platform, there's no need to have, of course, a child-appropriate design on the platform. There's the fact that the common thread, if you want, among both of our papers is that the enforcement of the rules will be a challenge and will require a high level of coordination between, on the one hand, the European Commission, the digital service coordinators, but also the other regulators that could be involved at the national level. And certainly there should be a great need for regulatory or regular dialogue between the enforcers and the platforms. That seems an obvious. the idea that the guidelines could actually be a living document. I don't know how that would go down, but anyway, it's the idea that maybe not a static thing, but something that could evolve over time because the threats and the issues are constantly evolving, and also the fact that the Commission could also maybe address, perhaps not in the guidelines, but at a later stage, the regulatory gaps, because there are gaps in the legislation as well. There are some services that are completely outside of the scope of any of the rules, either VSP, DSA, or even AVMSD. So there are services that are not regulated at the moment at the EU level and that could be particularly dangerous as well. So that's in a nutshell our presentation of our report. Voilà.